Hello, this is Oliver, and I'm the product manager for the SINUMERIK Edge applications Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture and Analyze MyWorkpiece Monitor. In this tutorial, I will guide you through all the steps that are necessary in order to install and commission those two apps. And we will go through all the steps, which will be installing Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture, then installing the so-called Samba server on the SINUMERIK Edge device, and finally we will also then install and commission Analyze MyWorkpiece Monitor. So let's get started. The first step is we open up the Edge management. So this is my SINUMERIK Edge device that is currently onboarded. And as a precondition in order to install and also use Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture, you need first a commissioned and installed adapter framework and SINUMERIK adapter. So let's get started. First of all, we decide to install a new application. And the application we will be installing is called AMW Capture, so that stands for Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture. So we select it. And then we are looking for the most current release, which is currently the version 2.4, build 16. We accept the terms and conditions, and then we hit the save button. And now the download of the application is being started. And we can check the progress of it, clicking on jobs, and there we can see that the download is starting instantaneously. If we would like to, we can click the refresh button, and now we see an updated state telling us that the application is now being downloaded to the Edge device. And after a while, this process is being finished. This you can see when the state has been reached to activate it. If we now go back to the App Management tab and hit the refresh button, we now see the freshly installed AMW Capture application. What we will do next is install an instance of the application, but before doing that, in the meantime, in the background, let's install an application called Samba server. The Samba server will be necessary to communicate between Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture and the SINUMERIK Operate, which is the HMI of the CNC. And here we select the version 3.0 because we do this on an Edge firmware version 3.1. It's exactly the same process. First of all, we accept the terms and conditions, and then we hit the save button. Now, while the Samba server is being downloaded and installed in the background, we make the next steps in order to install and commission the instance of Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture. Therefore, we hit the install button and click the confirm button here. And right now, Capture is stopped. That means it's not running yet. And so before we do that, let's have a look at the app instance configuration. So every SINUMERIK Edge app has a distinct instance configuration, and the one from Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture is very important. Here you define which HF signals are being recorded on your machine, and you define here basically how many axes your machine has. The default configuration of Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture assumes that you are using a 5-axis machine with the configuration of an X1, Y1, C1 and a Z1, B1 and a spindle axis. So that's quite a default 5-axis machine. And also the default configuration contains all available HF signals, starting from the cycle counter, of course, then the encoder position, the commanded positions, and so on. So I will not go through all of them now, but just keep in mind that on the default configuration, all the signals that SINUMERIK Edge offers in conjunction with the SINUMERIK CNC are being recorded. So in my particular example, I'm using here a 3-axis machine with 1 spindle. That means the fourth and the fifth axis are not going to be recorded. There are a couple of ways how to remove all those signals. Yeah, it's basically 3 ways. I choose going to the code section, and unfortunately this is now quite some manual task, but what would be necessary now in my particular case is removing the fourth and the fifth axis and getting this SP1 with me, so the spindle, because yeah, it's a 3-axis machine setup now, having X1, Y1 and Z1, and the spindle signal. And we basically have to repeat this for all the other signals now. Before doing that, let me show you also another very important point. So here basically you define what you will then later see on the Capture web UI as available signals to be recorded. And the second part of the configuration is that you also here define to which signals this application is subscribing to on the data bus of the SINUMERIK edge. So what you're doing basically here is repeating the steps that you just did before. You remove all the addresses that you're not gonna listen to. So in this particular case, we only want to record EngPOS1 to EngPOS4. That means I remove the 5th and the 6th signal, and we repeat this for the DES-POS and the control POS and so on. So in the background I prepared a template which I will now simply copy and paste. So what I'm now doing is removing completely the whole configuration we can see here, and I paste my own saved configuration which I've stored in a particular or in an extra text file, and I paste this all here. And as you can see, this is now configured in that way that all the signals only go from the index 1 to 4, EngPOS 1 to 4, DES-POS 1 to 4 and so on. And so that I do not have to do that manually all the time, you know, you can with Control A as an example on your keyboard and then do a right click and copy. You can now copy this content to a text editor and save it to use it for further purpose. And also now here on top, all those signals like power as an example only goes from 1 to 4. Now once this is done, we have now configured Capture to record all the necessary, to be able to record all the necessary signals from index 1 to 4. We hit the save button, and now this configuration is being sent down to the SINUMERIK edge device and configures Capture in the background. In the meantime, let's hit the refresh button and we should now be able to see the Samba server. As you might remember, we started to download it in the background and now it's downloaded. We also followed the same process. We hit the install button first. Now an app instance is being installed. And again here, before we start this app instance, we need to configure it first. The configuration here is quite easier compared to the one in Capture, but nevertheless, there are 2 very important fields you have to define here. As I said, the Samba server is a mean of communication between the SINUMERIK edge device and the SINUMERIK Operate HMI. We will embed a network drive into the SINUMERIK Operate, and this network drive needs some login credentials based on a username and a password, and this one you are basically defining here. You have to take care a little bit. You cannot define passwords like that. Like this is a very simple one, and the SINUMERIK Edge platform will not allow those kind of simple passwords. You have to use a little bit more complex one, and you also have to remember this password, or at least, you know, copy it later on, because you have to type it in later into the SINUMERIK Operate HMI also, which I will show you then later on. So for my particular example, I decided to use this password, and here as a username we use monitor. We hit the save button again. This app instance configuration is also now being sent down to the SINUMERIK Edge device and is configuring the Samba server. We can now start the app instances. Actually, it doesn't matter which one you start first. Let's start with the Samba server first, and then we continue with Capture. And if you would like to see when are the apps, let's say, available, or when they can be used on the SINUMERIK Edge device, the first step is to hit the Jobs tab here and then go to the Configure tab. And let's click Refresh to see what's the current state, and we can now see there are still 3 configuration jobs going on. And when they are all on state OK, that means the 2 apps we just configured and started up, they are now in the state where they can be used. In the meantime, I also would like to inform you once more that if it hasn't already happened in other tutorials, you can always access the application's documentation either here on MindSphere side. So you click this book icon, and there you see first of all the terms and conditions, and then on the section additional documents you can see the operating manual and other material that comes with the software. It highly depends on the application. Here with Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture we offer an output format description also, and a restrictions document and so on. So before we start using Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture on the SINUMERIK Edge device, we must finalize the configuration of the Samba server. So what comes next is we go to the SINUMERIK Operate and embed as a new network drive the SINUMERIK Edge device. So here I'm now connected with my SINUMERIK CNC, and in detail the steps might be different a little bit on your machine. I will try to show it as generic as possible. So first of all, we hit the menu select button, or if you are connected with a VNC software, you hit the F10 button, and then we go to Setup and make sure that your current access level is manufacturer. And then we go to the HMI soft key, and from here we go to the logical drives. Once this is clicked, we now can embed a new network drive. First of all, we select here a free one. I choose the second one. If the second one is already in use, then you should scroll down until you find one which has the type no drive. We click here on the combo box and select network Windows. And in the path, this is now very critical, we have to type in the following information. We start with 2 slashes, and then we must type in the local IP address of your SINUMERIK Edge device, another slash, and then in small letters share. Normally this IP is always the same, so it's 192, 168 to 14 to 49. Sometimes it may differ, and this then you need to check in your SINUMERIK Edge configuration, but I would say in 99% of the cases it's this IP address. And now you only need to define 2 more things. First of all, the username. And the question is what to type in here as a username and a password. Therefore, we go back to the Samba server configuration and have a look at the app instance configuration, and there we see the username and password, and this is exactly the one you need on the SINUMERIK operate. So I start typing in the username monitor here and paste it here. Okay. And paste it here. And now we can hit the OK button. But one minor thing, we can define here a soft key text allowing us to identify the network drive later on the operator panel. I choose here simply Edge. Let's hit the OK button. And we did not get any error message. That means that the network drive was successfully embedded. To make sure we can see it, we click the menu select button again. We go then to the program manager, and there we see a new network drive called Edge. We can click it, and there we can see that we have at least a connection. So in this particular case, using Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture or Capture for Analysis, the Samba drive is only being used to access logging information, which can also be accessed using the SINUMERIK Edge diagnosis page. In further versions of Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture or Capture for Analysis, the recording files have also been stored on the Samba drive. Since the version 2.4, this is not done anymore. So currently the Samba drive is there only being used for the logging information. But if you use it with other SINUMERIK Edge applications such as Analyze My Machine Condition, the Samba drive plays a very critical role, but details in another tutorial regarding Analyze My Machine Condition. So we have now successfully commissioned the Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture application and the Samba server. And now let's have a look together how to further commission Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture. Before we can use it, there is just one more step that needs to be done, and that is setting up a valid username. So in order to do so, we establish the first time a connection to our SINUMERIK Edge device. Therefore, you either need to call the DNS name or the IP address. In my particular case, I am choosing the IP address, which is visible here. And then you need to also to type in this port. And when the first time you are establishing the connection, it might be that you also need to type in https:// and then the IP address. We hit the enter button, and now we see the mini web. And the mini web is the administration environment of the SINUMERIK Edge device. And you now need to log in as an administrator. Then we hit the login button and we go to the security section, and there we go to the user manager. In the user manager, we first have to create a new group called AMW Capture. On my device, you can see it's already created, but it would look as follows. You hit the add group button, you type in AMW Capture, and then you hit the add group button. Then we would see a new group, which is called AMW Capture. And then we need to create a new user and assign it to the AMW Capture group. That could be any name, so feel free to choose one. In my case, I decide to call it MyWorkpiece, and then I have to define a safe password. And then I need to hit the Add New User button. We have now created the MyWorkpiece user, and now we need to assign it to the AMW Capture group. And I do this here by clicking the check mark and then Save User. And that's pretty much it. You can now log out from the mini web now we can start the first time the Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture web UI. This can be done by accessing the diag page. The SINUMERIK Edge shows me this welcome screen here, and we can now log in as an administrator again. Then we go to the app management section, and then I go here to the Edge apps, where I now see all the installed Edge apps which have a UI. So I can see here Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture, and I use this to go to the UI of Capture. So a new tab is now being opened, which also has the IP address of my SINUMERIK Edge device, and after the slash comes the AMW Capture. So you have now the possibility to either call the Capture UI with this button, or in the future what you can also do is just copy that, remove this, and if we now just add the IP address /AMW Capture, hit the enter button, the Capture UI also shows up. Okay, so this is the main section for Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture. We have different areas, a so-called job manager, a job editor. You can see audit events, that's basically a logging page, and there is a data management section. And you have also here an area where you can see notifications on different levels, like info, warning, or error. And then there is the settings area. In the settings, you have the possibility to define a couple of things, such as what shall Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture do in the event if the SINUMERIK Edge device is running low on data volume on the disk. You can set a threshold here, like if 80% is occupied, then you have the choice to stop the recording and do not delete any data. By doing so, you do not lose any old data, but new data is not being created. Or you have the second strategy stating automatically delete the oldest entries and continue recording. So that's basically a ring buffer, and that means that older data is being lost in the situation where you do a constant recording, as an example. You can also specify the split size. So Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture creates JSON files and puts the process data into the JSON files, and here you can define when those JSON files should be split. The standard setting is 100 megabyte, but you can also decrease it to 10 megabyte. The last setting is regarding time zones. It is recommended to leave it as it is, I would say. So the standard settings are always based on UTC time. But if you would like to use a local time zone, then you also have the possibility using this slider to specify or use your local time zone, which is necessary when you use time-based start and stop triggers, about which we will talk in a minute. So we now hit the save button to save our changes. And now we go back to the job manager. On the job manager page, you see all the available recording jobs. Currently the list is empty. So let's create a new one by hitting the create new job button. And you basically have to define two things. One is the HF signals to be recorded, and also the low frequency signals to be recorded. And then the trigger section. If we collapse this list of HF signals, you see all the available signals we defined on MindSphere side. So as an example, if we collapse the actual access position group, we see EngPOS 1 to 4. And as you probably remember, we removed the entries for EngPOS 5 and 6. And that's also the reason why we now only see the signals from 1 to 4. If you would like to record all the available signals, you simply have to click the check mark here on top, and then implicitly all the available signals are being recorded. And if for some reason you do not want to record a specific signal, because it's probably not available on your machine, because it doesn't have a second encoder as an example, or you are not interested in your use case, then you can hit the check mark here. So from this group, no signals now being recorded. And you can see here now by the color of the checkbox that not all signals are being recorded. So for now, I would like to record all these signals. That's why I bring back the check mark here again. And let's uncollapse this group. The low frequency signals are there to record so-called BTSS variables coming from the SINUMERIK CNC. In this tutorial, I will not go further into any detail into this, since for the commissioning with Analyze MyWorkpiece Monitor and the use case with Analyze MyWorkpiece Monitor, this currently does not play a role, but just in a few words, you can use this section by adding a signal group and then some signals to record so-called BTSS signals. Let's just remove this for now. And let's go to the trigger section. The trigger section is very important because here you define basically when shall data be recorded from your SINUMERIK CNC. The most easy one is the manual trigger type. So manual means you decide here on the UI whether a job shall be started or stopped. You can also use time-based triggers. You can say, okay, please start the recording at a specific time. As an example, let's start it on Monday, 8 AM. Or we can also use periodic trigger and say, okay, every day start at 8 AM. Oops. And stop it after, as an example, 14 times. The next type of trigger is a so-called data-based trigger. There you can say, okay, if, as an example, the load of the spindle is higher than, let's say, 80%, then please start a recording. And the last type is the so-called event-based triggers that is being used in conjunction with NC-based events. So what is an event? When NC code is executed, we call this a so-called HF block event, so a high-frequency block event. And in this HF block event, the NC code is contained. And this NC code then can be used to start or stop the recording of Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture. And this NC code is basically coming from the NC program that you are executing on your CNC. Therefore, I've prepared an example of a CNC program we will be using in this tutorial. And let's have a look at it. So it's stored in the part programs and it's called in German Kreisfahrt. That means it's basically a circle we are doing here. So let's just open it. And as we can see here, this is basically the main line traveling a circle with a feed of 5 meters per minute. And there are now two very important lines that I added here. One is called the G4 F0 colon start and then G4 F0 stop. And these comments, start and stop, we will be using to start and stop the recording of capture. Just one hint, why do I write G4 F0? Why did I not simply write something like that, colon and start? And This would not work as a start trigger because the SINUMERIK Edge device only receives NC code that has not been removed by the preprocessor of the SINUMERIK CNC. And the SINUMERIK CNC, as an example, removes all the comments from your NC part program. And therefore you somehow have to combine your comment with a G code that is not being removed by the preprocessor. And one valid way by doing so is adding a G4F0 section and then write the comment later on. And what does G4F0 basically mean? It just means that the NC here is waiting for 0 seconds. So you are basically waiting 1 IPO cycle. And that means we can now remove this line here again. And you can also use it for more complex triggers, such as, I don't know, let's say capture start ID 4711, and we could now use this whole line also to start a recording. Yeah, and this comes handy when you're having several sections that you would like to start or stop recording. For now, let's just stick here with start, and let's close the NC program again. And if we now go back to the Capture UI, we take those triggers. I now say, okay, please start the recording on a certain event. The event should take place on the first channel. Since I only have a 1-channel machine, it only makes sense for me to select the first channel. And now I need to tell Capture when to start the recording, and I type in now here start. And this is because I gave one of the lines the comment G4F0 start. I could basically also copy, the whole line if I would like to. By doing so, the recording would now also start here, but it's not really necessary in that case because we also compare just subsections of the line, and if it fits, the recording also starts. And because the condition is true, so we keep it here with start, and that's basically enough for this simple use case. If there are sometimes situations where one simple NC command is not enough to find the right trigger, then you need to find a more complex way to find the right starting section. So you can, as an example, use the so-called call stack level. The call stack level defines the level of a subprogram. So from an NC program you can call subprograms, and these subprograms can call other subprograms again, and each level you are in when calling a subprogram, this is called the call stack level. So in an example, if I have on the second subprogram being called also a start comment, then I hit this to 2, and then my NC code would be my recording would be starting there. This can become even more complex, so I can also use the line number of the NC code and the tool ID, the program path. But this is all not necessary in this simple example. So let's just stick with the NC code start. And we also would like to stop the recording at some time. So therefore I select also channel 1 and stop, because at the end there was the section. If we have a look again, the section with G4F0 stop. So I define a name here. Here I define it as circle tutorial capture. And that's basically it. Now we hit the save button. Capture now creates the recording job, and in the job manager section, to which Capture brings us automatically once the saving operation has been executed, we can see the circle tutorial capture job. And if we would like to, we can now edit the job configuration again. We could remove it, we could export it. But for now, I would say let's activate it. What is basically happening now, the data is not being recorded yet. Capture now waits for the start trigger, and only when the starting condition is true, then the recording starts. And the same goes for the stop condition, so the recording then stops once the stop condition was true. What I'm doing next is executing the NC program on my SINUMERIK CNC device. And what you will now see is that the recording at some point automatically starts and also stops. So as you can probably hear, I activated the drives from the CNC, and I in the meantime selected the NC program, so the circle one, and you can see here now again the circle command and also the start stop. And I would now activate this NC program, so hit the NC start button, and let's just see what happens on the Capture UI. As you could see, in the meantime, there was such a red button indicating that Capture was recording data. And we can now, if we go to the Data Management tab, we see that in the Circle Tutorial Capture there is a new job run. And this job run contains one file. And this was just executed. So since it was quite a short execution time, it just contains 500 kilobytes. And yeah, this basically tells us that the recording was successful. Okay, so we have now created our first process data recording using Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture. And now we would like to analyze and visualize this data using Analyze MyWorkpiece Toolpath. There is a direct connection feature with which you can import the data from Capture directly into Toolpath. Before you're able to do so, you need to follow the steps that I will be showing you now. So first of all, you need to call the mini web page of your SINUMERIK Edge device. Therefore, I type in the IP address here following the port 5443. I hit the enter button, and then I type in the login credentials. From there we go to the security section, and then we click on the certificate management tab. And now we end up in the certificate store of the Edge device, and we need to install now two distinct certificates in the server certs store and in the trusted clients. So let's start with the server certificate. You will probably already see one server certificate being installed. You can directly click on it and remove it. And then this can be done by clicking on the certificate and hit the delete button. My certificate store is currently empty now, so I cannot show you this. But let's just now create a new server certificate. We end up with this new menu here. Under common name, we type in the IP address. We copy this and also paste it into the DNS name. In case our Edge device is called via an IP address. If you call it using the DNS name, then you should not type in the IP address, but of course the DNS name of your Edge device into these two fields. And now this is very important. Under file name, you have to type in SSL server cert, like that, okay? The rest you can leave like that. So in this case, it's a self-signed certificate. And also we let the checkbox active create as CA certificate. And then we click on create certificate and store. And now we can see that the certificate has been created, and we can now export this to our computer, because we need to install this on our client so that our client later on trusts the connection to this edge device. So I click export, and for the server certificate I leave all the settings as they are. So I click here export, and now we could see that it was downloaded. We repeat now quite similar steps with the Trusted Client certificate. So you go to Trusted Clients and you should see an empty certificate space from the beginning. Here we only have to specify a common name called AMW Toolpath. And we have to set a checkbox here and create as CA certificate. That's pretty much it. And then you click again on create certificate and store. And then you should end up with a view like that. And we export this certificate also to our client. So I hit the export button, and now very important, you click the checkbox here, export key. And you need to define a passphrase for the certificate in order to, when you install it on your Windows client, the client will ask for a password. So this is necessary, this step. Yeah, let's just, it can be a self-defined password, doesn't have to be very complicated or something similar. It's up to you. And also let's just export this one. And now our steps are finished here. So we can log out and also close the browser. So let's now install the certificates. So in my case, the certificates ended up in the downloads folder, and we start installing the server certificate. So I make a right click here, and then I click on install certificate, and I select as store location the current user. And now also very important, you should not automatically select the certificate store. You should select place all certificates in the following store. You click on browse, and then you need to install the server certificate as a trusted root certification authorities. So we do that, and we install this. And then also Windows tells us the import was successful, and now we install also the client certificate. Here I type in install pfx, and again let's choose the current user. Click the next button again, and now we need to type in the same password we just have defined using while we were exporting the certificate from the mini web. Again, we need to place all certificates in the following store. We click on browse, and now you should select the personal store. We click on next and also on finish. And then also the import is shown as successful, and we click the OK button. And now let's just check whether the certificates have been installed correctly. So on my Windows PC, I click on the Windows key and the R button. So the run field opens, and then I type in certmanager.msc. And let's just make this full screen. And we go first to the personal certificate store. And here we see the AMW Toolpath certificate. This is the one we will later need in order to authenticate against the mini web. And then let's check whether the server certificate has also been correctly installed. I go to the certificates folder of the Trusted Root Certification Authorities. And here on the very top, I find my server certificate. And we can actually check also whether the system correctly accepts this certificate. So by accessing the mini web page again, if we see that there is now this log symbol showing us that a secure connection between my client, my laptop here, and the SINUMERIK Edge device was established. And this is necessary. You need to see this log symbol once you have restarted Chrome. You need to close it, and then it reloads the certificate store of Windows and sees that there is this new server certificate here with this IP address. And only if you see this log symbol without a red warning or something similar, then Toolpath is also prepared to import the process data. So let's now open Toolpath and see whether we can import the data from the SINUMERIK Edge device. So now we click on External Source in Toolpath, and from here we click on Import Captured Files from Edge. And now we see a screen where we can actually add SINUMERIK Edge devices to establish a connection between Toolpath and Capture. So normally this, on the left hand side, this menu is empty, so you would click Add New, and then you can add a new device. I've already prepared mine here, so I click here on this gear icon, and these are the settings you would like to use with the current version of Toolpath, which is 2.4, and also with Capture, which is 2.4. In the future, you will not have to provide all these details, but currently what you would need to provide is the full URL, including HTTPS, // then the IP address again, and then the port 5444, then a slash, and now either AMW Capture if you use Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture, or AMW for Analysis. And then also you need to click here on Capture for Analysis in case you're using Capture for Analysis. In my case, I only use AMW Capture, which is why if I uncheck this, it automatically changes the URL to AMW Capture. And I need to define a name. I call mine here Edge App Tutorials, such as the same asset name on MindSphere side. We can either test the connection or simply hit the Save button. Okay, now it recognizes that no changes have been made, so we can simply click on it, and then it establishes a connection, and we can now see here our circle tutorial capture job. I click on it, I hit the next button, and then I see all the runs which have been executed. For this example, let's just select the top one and hit the next button, and now Toolpath asks me how it wants to import it. If you want more details, there is a more detailed and a longer webinar about how to handle Toolpath. For now, let's just take the default settings. I click the load button, and now it tells me that the file transfer has been successful, and now the typical import dialog from Toolpath appears. And again, I just do a basic mapping here. If you would like to learn more about the mappings of Analyze MyWorkpiece Toolpath, what you can do during the import, I highly recommend to you the webinar about Toolpath, which is in 4 chapters using Analyze MyWorkpiece Toolpath and all the functionalities and features to improve your production quality. So for now, let's just import the data as it is. Close the window, and then Toolpath shows us this nice circle which we have just programmed and recorded. We can also see the NC code here. It's containing the start and the stop triggers that we define in the part program, and also the NC code which was lying in between, so the definition of the circle. And yeah, if we want, we can now extend this further and do some color coding analysis, which is let's say one of the key features of Analyze MyWorkpiece Toolpath. But once more, you will learn this elsewhere in the detailed Toolpath webinar. For now, this was just a tutorial to show you how you can actually import data from Analyze MyWorkpiece Capture using Analyze MyWorkpiece Toolpath and get your first point cloud. So thank you very much for your attention and see you next time.